Hi everybody, Expert Aviator here, and it was a pretty exciting week for me in that we had two new releases of Atlanta scenery for X-Plane 11. One new one from Imaginesim and an update from Nimbus, which is the scenery that I currently use. Now if you want to cut to the chase, my opinion really is if you own Nimbus V1, you get a $10 discount. Then Nimbus V2 is almost a no-brainer. If you don't own either, I think that Nimbus still has the edge. The price after the exchange rate is pretty similar. But for me, Nimbus, it's a big jump from V1 for V2. They seem to have focused more on the details. They have some novelties, or call them features if you will, like the departure boards at the gates. And some of the lighting is kind of cool. But there are some areas where Imaginesim does have the edge, particularly the grass. Some of the terrain is interesting. The SAM gates might be important to some of you as well, but there are also some issues with it too. I bought the Nimbus V2 scenery, and I'll be taking a look at comparisons between V1 and V2, and also comparing what I see in the sim with Nimbus V2 against the stock images from Imaginesim's website. But for now, let's have a look at Nimbus V2 versus some real world footage that I took earlier this year. Okay, so what we're going to do is take a look at the original Nimbus Atlanta, and we'll compare that against their version 2. So for those of you that are interested, these are the settings that I'm using for all of the pictures. Unless I say otherwise, it's going to be noon with completely clear weather. The images that I've chosen to show are areas that either I was interested in seeing some improvement in, or where I actually noticed a difference when I started to look at the scenery. So here we are looking at the threshold of 2.6 left in V1, and right at first I noticed on the edge of the taxiway there's a bit of a slope. This area is raised up in real life where the aircraft wait for departure, and that was really lacking in version 1. If we jump to version 2, so you can see you've got the little hill there now down by the maintenance facility. There are a bunch more static models inside the hangars, and some of the doors are open too. But maybe one of the negative things that stands out for me is the chevrons on the lead into the runway are missing in V2, which you see here. And also the runway textures and the taxiway textures, I feel like they're more realistic in V1 somehow. This is V2 and this is V1, but I'll let you guys be the judge of that. You see there's also some work been done on the roads in V2 as well. In some ways better, in some ways not. So this is looking at the final approach runway 27 left. This is version 1. This is version 2. Again, runway textures and taxiway textures are what really stand out to me here. It's almost as if the airfield has been produced in a different season, between this V2 here looking more summery and this looking more like fall or autumn. In general though, the objects around the roads and things they're pretty similar. Taking a look at the tower, things that stand out to me especially is the tower real world is kind of set slightly below taxiway Dixie there, and of course all of these red panels on the terminal which are not there anymore. This is V1. and this is V2. So now the tower is set down correctly. That's looking nice. The terminal looks much better. You've got those darker looking panels now across the whole airfield. You've got a little wall around this ramp, just to the south of the tower, which looks kind of cool. I quite like that. Nighttime view from one of the most westerly and southerly gates. This is V1 and this is V2. So fairly similar really at night, except for the actual terminal textures have changed and you can see inside, and those people really are moving around inside, which is pretty nice when you go and take a look at it. You'll also see in V2, if you look right at the bottom of the image, there's a little sign down on the tarmac, on what is the roadway for the trucks, which is missing in V1 and it's there in V2. This is fully nighttime now, not just dusk. Not a lot to say here except the orange lights seem to flood the apron a little bit better than they used to. So here we are at one of the gates. I thought it was a good idea to take a close-up look at the terminal. In V1 it really is just a facade texture, there's nothing clever going on. In V2 there's much more to it. You can actually see people inside the glass. You've got these cool little departure boards now which you can set, which Nimbus first introduced with their Chicago O'Hare scenery. And you'll also notice the baggage trucks and general vehicles. They're just higher quality in the new version, as is the facade in general. This is exactly the same gate, and you see you've got that little set-in area right next to where the jetway is in V2, is not there in V1. So that looks pretty good to me. Here we are, another scene from earlier with Stormy Weather in V1, Stormy Weather in V2. I think you can see that the overall quality of the texture work is definitely improved between V1 and V2. This is looking at the museum in V1, and take notice of where the FedEx are. Have a look at the building, have a look at the building next to the old Delta 757. When we switch to V2, watch how the textures change. Much more detail in V2 than there was in V1. I think the museum aircraft really haven't changed at all. That Delta livery is still flipped, but this is V1. Look at those textures on the buildings to V2, and overall this is where I see the biggest change, is in this texture work. It's almost as if they've taken a look at every texture. So on the right hand side, far right, look at the oil, the fuel reservoirs, and the building just below that. V2, there's much more detail going on there. Overhead at night, version 1, version 2. The standout thing for me really is the canopies that were built over the arrival pickup areas. They've got the lights on there and the canopies are actually there. Same thing V1 in the daytime. Look at the colour of the textures compared to V2. It's less concrete looking and more asphalt looking, which I'm not sure how correct that really is. Moving on to the tunnel. This is the tunnel down by runway 10 and on the Sierra Golf Taxiway. This is V1. The tunnels, look at the bottom of the picture, they really don't go anywhere. In V2, this is more like how it is in real life. There's kind of a gap between the runway and the Sierra Golf Taxiway. So it's improved compared to version 1. This is where the executive aircraft park. You see it actually says Landmark Aviation on there now. It didn't used to, and if you look at the Renaissance Hotel, the quality of that is improved somewhat. Again, mostly texture work. The surrounding buildings have stayed pretty much the same. Here we are looking at the arrival pickup area. Version 1, notice that the train station is just a solid block. Version 2, the tracks kind of go inside, they kind of weirdly end there as well. But you do have that canopy there now, which is a nice addition. This is the infamous Victor Loop Taxiway, which drops down and slightly below the approach there. This is version 1 and this is version 2. Now there is a bit of a dip there in the real world. Those aircraft do go lower than the runway to allow the runway to continue to be used. The dip doesn't seem as pronounced, and I was watching a stream of Imaginesim the other night, and the Victor loop there is much lower down. But Imaginesim, it looked like it was overdone, to be honest, so I'm not quite sure which is the better one. Okay, so I don't own the Imaginesim Atlanta. I didn't really want to buy two. But what I did do is take those images from Imaginesim's website, which I would assume are their best examples of the work that they did. Why would their marketing department choose anything other than that? And I went and grabbed the same image in Nimbus V2 in my sim. Now the images are not the same resolution, and I'm not going to stretch this to fit because it wouldn't do it justice. But these were the highest resolution images I could find on the website. So here we are looking west. Take note of the canopies. I think the canopy work of the arrival pickup points are much better in the Imaginesim. It's one of the areas I do think they did a better job. So this is Imaginesim, and this is Nimbus. So Nimbus, they seem kind of dark for some reason, which doesn't quite look right. Although if you look at the little train station drop off, there is a bit more to it, to the modelling in this one, the Nimbus, compared to this, the Imaginesim. Also there's some cars in the car park in Imaginesim, which is kind of nice. Here's the canopy close up in Imaginesim. I think they've done a better job here, that it's smoother and there's more detail on the actual doors down there. This is Nimbus. Again, this really dark stuff, which I don't know what it's about. The 3D modelling of these curves, Imaginesim kind of nice and smooth. Nimbus not so much, not as much work going on the doors either. However, how much are you really looking at this when you're flying? Well, I'll let you decide. This is one of the gates where you're showing off that curvy part of the terminal there. This is the Imaginesim. This is the Nimbus. I think the actual buildings with the glass that you can see inside, like really see 3D modelling inside, in Nimbus is nicer. I think the jetways look nicer, even though they're auto gate and not SAM. And if you look at that curvy bit, you can see through the curvy part to these static objects, whereas in Imaginesim you cannot. Also note that in this Nimbus, these static aircraft come with the scenery. You can remove them. There is a way. But with Imaginesim, these aircraft that you see here, this is World Traffic 3 from Just Flight. You don't get any static aircraft objects. Also take a look at the texture work on the apron there. Imaginesim looks more like concrete. Nimbus, it seems a little bit dark to me, and I don't know whether that's correct or not. If you look closely at the taxi, not the taxiway markings, but the yellow markings for the ramps on the ground, neither are actually correct when you compare it to satellite imagery. They're both kind of close, but there are little things, little lazy things in Imaginesim, such as the parking board there just doesn't exist real world if you look at the satellite imagery. It's like a stock docking board they've added to every gate. This is looking from the Foxtrot 3 intersection on the Foxtrot Taxiway on Imaginesim. This is one that I think it looks a ton better. The grass is nice, the taxiway sign is spot on. Compare that to Nimbus, super flat, and believe me, there is no Foxtrot to Foxtrot 3 intersection sign in the Nimbus. I look for it, it's not there, which is a real shame. So this is one of the areas I think Imaginesim actually wins over. A higher shot of that little curvy part of the terminal. This is Imaginesim. This is Nimbus. I think the overall detail in Nimbus and the overall texture work, it just looks a lot better to me. But again, you can be the judge. Nighttime high up, you've got Imaginesim's white lights and Nimbus's yellowy lights. I'm not sure which ones are correct. You can see the canopy covers on Imaginesim here are just fixed as the American flag and some other colours. Whereas in the Nimbus, there is a little plugin that allows you to control those colours and the colours that are on the tower as well, which is gimmicky if you ask me, but kind of cool. Here we are looking down the runway at some of the slopes. Imaginesim have a more detailed terrain mesh for sure. I watched some of the streams and there was definitely more undulation in the taxiways and in the runways, but it was overdone. The guy that was streaming, it was such that everybody knows the crash situation that you can get an X-plane when that is overdone. Here's the same view in Nimbus. Let me jump back. Imaginesim and Nimbus. You can actually see a little bit of the chevron stuff going on there that I don't know why they just ended up with a black square at the end of the runway. This is Imaginesim. This is Nimbus. For me, not a lot in it. If you do look right at the top of the picture, you see the green circles that are around the 27 right departure area where Mike 20. Those green circles really are there. This is on the Imaginesim. This is on the Nimbus. Seem to be missing to me. So again, overall attention to detail in Imaginesim for me seems lacking. Here we are looking across to the tower. You can definitely see that grass there, which is nice. And it looks like I didn't have the equivalent image for Nimbus for some reason. Okay, this is Imaginesim, and I want you to look at the tower. Take a real close look at that tower. Have a look at the detail of the actual windows from the control room. The top of the tower, which I believe is actually more correct in Imaginesim. But just look at the overall quality of the windows and the little catwalks. Let's jump to Nimbus. Much more detail. You've got some discoloration, which looks real. It looks like real glass, I believe it is, that you can see inside of. And if you jump down onto the buildings, this is Imaginesim. This is Nimbus. Based on what I saw when I was at Atlanta for real in the summertime this year, Nimbus looks a bit more correct to me. And here we are looking across Echo 5, which I guess is that view. So it's this one to that one. So there you go. There's a comparison between Nimbus's V1 and V2, as well as Imaginesim and Nimbus V2. They both have pros and cons. For some people, SAM is going to be important. For some people, the terrain mapping is going to be really important. I wish that was a little bit more interesting in Nimbus's than it is, but overall I do think Nimbus has the edge, especially if you've already got V1 and you can get that $10 off. Seems like a no-brainer for me. If you don't own either, Imaginesim, depending on your exchange rate, is slightly more expensive. But I hope this has been helpful, and I'll speak to you soon. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.